The Street Where Justice Creed Part 1. The Street, the Silence. The screened sun had just begun its descent behind the low rooftops of a quiet American town. Stretching long shadows across Main Street, the storefronts had seen better days. Paint peeling, windows dusty, signs half-lit. It was the kind of place that remembered more than it hoped, where time seemed to sag on the shoulders of its people. In the middle of that tired street, under the flicker of a crooked traffic light, stood Martha Green, a thin, gray-haired woman in a second-hand dress and worn-out sneakers. Her hands were balled into fists. Her voice, though scratchy from age and hardship, rang out with a steel no one expected from a woman her size. "You know what you did," she shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the man in uniform in front of her. "You touched my daughter, and now she's gone." Officer Dwayne Harlan towered over her. His dark sunglasses glinted despite the fading light, and his smirk cut deeper than any badge he wore. The patch on his chest read Liberty County Police. But everyone in town knew there was no liberty to be found there. A few bystanders paused, watching from sidewalks and doorways. No one stepped in. Harlan's voice was low and mean. "Watch yourself, old lady. That mouth could cost you a lot more than just your daughter." The crowd gasped. Martha didn't flinch. "You said you'd take her if she didn't do what you wanted. You said you'd come for me too. I ain't afraid of you. I want her back." The moment cracked like a thunderclap. The officer shoved her. Not a hard push, but hard enough to make her stumble back. Her heel caught a crack in the pavement, and she hit the ground, her breath knocked from her chest. No one moved. No one helped. That's how things worked in Liberty County, because everyone knew behind closed doors, behind locked drawers, in sealed court files and unspoken conversations, this town wasn't run by law. It was ruled by fear, and the police, they were the gatekeepers of silence. Part 2. Shadows behind the badge. 3 days before that moment on Main Street, Martha's daughter, Lena, had vanished. She was 19, quiet, smart, strong like her mother, but not strong enough to stop what was coming. She had confided in her mom one night over reheated soup. "Mom, Officer Harlan, he's been following me." Martha had looked up slowly, her spoon halfway to her lips. "Following?" Lena nodded, eyes darting to the curtained window. "He pulled me over last week, said my taillight was out, then said he could let it go if I came with him somewhere private." Martha's stomach turned. "What?" "I told him no. I told him I wasn't like that. He laughed, said if I didn't give him what he wanted, he'd take it anyway, or come for you instead." They both knew what that meant, and they both knew the sheriff wouldn't do anything about it. 2 nights later, Lena was gone. No signs, no calls, no police report filed, because when Martha went to the station, Officer Harlan was the only one on duty, and he just smiled. Part 3. The lonely war. Martha walked those cracked sidewalks. For 3 days, she held a photograph in her hand and knocked on every door in Liberty County. No one answered. The baker who once gave Lena extra muffins now kept his head down. The cashier who'd flirted with her daughter at the drugstore crossed the street to avoid Martha. Even the Reverend didn't return her calls. Fear turned good people into ghosts. On the 4th morning, she stood outside the police station with a cardboard sign that read, "Where's my daughter?" She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood, silent, still. By noon, 2 officers came out and ripped the sign in half. By 3 p.m., she was gone from the steps, but not from people's minds. And certainly not from Harlan's. Part 4. A city of no witness. When Lena was found 6 days after she disappeared, she was alive. Barely. Someone had dumped her at the edge of town near the railroad tracks. Her wrists were bruised, her face swollen, her clothes torn. The hospital report said she'd suffered severe trauma, but no details made it into any police file. Martha begged the doctors to testify. They looked at her like she was crazy. "We don't want trouble, ma'am," they said. "Just be glad she's alive." There were no fingerprints, no security cameras, and no other witnesses when Martha took the case to the court. The judge rolled his eyes. The defense lawyer, a smug man with greasy hair and a shiny Rolex, asked where her proof was. "She says a cop did it." He asked with a smirk. "I say that's just a bedtime story gone wrong." The court laughed. Lena cried, and the gavel came down like a coffin lid. Part 5. The departure. At night, Martha packed his suitcases, one for her, one for Lena. They boarded a bus with no destination, just a direction away from the town where justice was a whisper no one dared speak, away from the police station where screams were muffled behind metal bars, away from Liberty County, where the name had become a joke only the corrupt could stomach. They didn't speak much on the road. Lena sat by the window, staring out at the blur of gas stations, forests, and rest stops. But Martha had a plan. Somewhere, someone still believed in justice. Someone had power, and she'd find them. No matter what. Part 6. The boy behind the counter. They landed in a different state, an unfamiliar city with colder air, newer streets, and strangers who didn't look away when you made eye contact. It wasn't paradise, but it wasn't Liberty County either. They found a small, affordable room above an old hardware store. The landlord was kind but firm. Pay on time, or the room goes, no exceptions. Martha nodded. She understood rules. It was corruption she couldn't stomach. Lena still hardly spoke. The sparkle she once had dimmed. Her shoulders always curled inward, like she was trying to hide from a world that hadn't protected her. Martha needed work, but her body, aged from years of factory labor and stress, could barely stand for long hours. Lena offered to help, but Martha wouldn't let her. Not yet. That's when they discovered the small pizza shop at the corner of 8th and Madison. A simple place. Faded sign, no frills, counter, one register for booths, and one young man behind the counter. His name tag read Derek. He looked no more than 20, with shaggy hair tucked under a baseball cap and grease stains on his apron. But he had kind eyes when Lena walked in to ask about the help wanted sign. He didn't stare at her the way most did. He just nodded. You ever worked a register before? He asked gently. No, Lena said, voice barely above a whisper. That's okay, he smiled. I'll show you. Part 7. Quiet healing. Hidden truths. Over the next few weeks, Lena began to return to life. Not all at once, but in pieces. She still flinched at loud noises, still avoided uniformed men. But around Derek, something softened. He never asked questions, never pushed, just handed her receipts, laughed when she dropped pepperoni, and made her feel normal. Martha noticed. One night, while folding laundry in their cramped room, she asked, You like him? Lena hesitated, then nodded. He's different, Mom. He listens. Martha smiled faintly. Just be careful. We've seen what happens when men pretend to listen. Lena nodded. He's not pretending. Part 8. A love that demands justice. It was late one night, just after closing, when Derek found Lena wiping down the counter alone. He sat across from her. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Why do you always seem scared of cops? Her breath caught. Derek held up his hands. You don't have to answer. I'm sorry. Forget I asked. But Lena didn't want to forget. Not anymore. She told him, not every detail, but enough. About the officer, the threats, the disappearance, the trial, the laughter in the courtroom, and how no one cared. When she finished, Derek's jaw was tight. I believe you, he said. Then she asked a question of her own. If you really care about me, will you help me get justice? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Part 9. The truth about Derek. Martha had her doubts. She didn't trust anyone anymore. Not after what they'd lived through. But the way Derek treated Lena with patience, with care. It was different. One afternoon, she passed the shop and saw them laughing through the window. For the first time in months, Lena looked free. That's when Derek revealed something unexpected. He wasn't just a part-time worker trying to pay rent. He was Derek Monroe, son of General Carlton Monroe, the Chief of the United States Army. Staff. Martha almost dropped her coffee. Why are you working in a pizza shop? She asked, skeptical. He shrugged. My dad wanted me to see how the real world works. I wanted to earn what I had. And you're telling me you can take on the whole corrupt police system of that town? I'm telling you I won't. Stop trying, he said. Part 10. Back into the fire. They returned to Liberty County. Not to move back, not to forgive, but to fight. Derek wore no uniform, carried no badge. Just a folder filled with statements, a camera, and a quiet fire that no one expected from a kid in sneakers. He started visiting local businesses, asking for statements. Most refused. He went live on social media. Still, no traction. Then one morning, he walked into the county courthouse to file a new case on behalf of Lena Green. They arrested him on the spot. Trespassing, they said, inciting unrest. And that night, he didn't come home. Martha and Lena panicked, but they didn't know the storm that was coming, because the second General Carlton Monroe received the call that his only son had been imprisoned in a small town jail for seeking justice. He boarded a helicopter, and he wasn't coming alone. Part 11. The helicopter over Main Street. It began with a sound no one in Liberty County had ever heard before, a thunder that wasn't in the sky. At 9:12 a.m., the streets trembled. A black military helicopter appeared overhead, casting a long shadow over Main Street, the same street where months ago Martha had screamed for justice and been shoved to the ground. Windows rattled. Shopkeepers stepped outside, squinting upward. The helicopter descended slowly right in front of the police station, and when the doors slid open, 6 uniformed security officers stepped out in formation. Behind them, a tall, imposing man in military dress, dark sunglasses over his stern expression. General Carlton Monroe, Chief of Staff of the United States Army. No one knew why he was here until he spoke. "My son is in this building," he said, loud enough for every officer and passerby to hear. "And unless someone gives me a lawful reason why, this town is about to be under federal investigation." Part 12. The reckoning begins. Sheriff Wilson, a bloated man with a permanent sweat stain beneath his collar, waddled out with a forced grin. "General Monroe, we didn't realize." "You didn't realize what, Sheriff?" the general interrupted coldly. "That you had no warrant, that my son was detained without probable cause, that you fabricated charges against a civilian trying to expose corruption?" The sheriff's smile vanished. The general gave a silent signal. Within seconds, his men entered the station, passed through barred doors, and found Derek bruised, locked in a holding cell with no record in the system. Lena and Martha stood nearby, frozen. Then Martha whispered, "You came for him." General Monroe turned to her. "Ma'am, I came for justice." Part 13. 2 hours in the basement. A chief's security detail dragged out for officers who had been involved in the arrest, including Officer Dwayne Harlan. For 2 hours, the town watched through the station's grimy windows as justice played out, not with lawyers and judges, but fists and fury. It wasn't sanctioned. It wasn't protocol, but it was deserved. Martha didn't look away. Neither did the dozens of townspeople who gathered outside, drawn by the noise, by the memory of their own bruises, their own stories of abuse and threats. And when Officer Harlan was brought out in handcuffs, his lip bloodied and pride shattered, the people cheered. A woman from the grocery store stepped forward and shouted, "He threatened my daughter too." A man yelled, "He beat my son." One by one, stories poured out, stories that had been sealed behind fear. That fear had now been cracked wide open. Part 14. The courtroom reopens. The local courthouse hadn't seen a full audience in years, but that morning it was packed, not just with lawyers and reporters, but with townspeople who had waited their entire lives to be heard. This time, the judge wasn't from Liberty County. The federal government had sent one in from out of state, neutral, honest, brutally fair. Derek sat beside Lena and Martha at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle sat Harlan, now stripped of his badge, flanked by nervous lawyers, his smirk long gone. Witness after witness came forward, the ones who had once been too afraid, the nurses, the mechanics, the teachers, even the local priest. And when Lena took the stand, her voice didn't shake. "He told me I had to give him what he wanted," she said. "When I said no, he said, 'You'll wish you had.' And I did." For a long time, Martha wept quietly in the front row. The courtroom fell into a deep, respectful silence. The judge leaned forward. "Do you fear him now?" Lena looked over at Harlan. "No," she said, "not anymore." Part 15. A town freed. It took the jury only 3 hours. Guilty. Of assault, of kidnapping, of abuse of power, of conspiracy to obstruct justice. But it wasn't Just about one man. The judge ordered a sweeping federal review of the Liberty County Police Department. Over a dozen officers were suspended. Several more were indicted. The sheriff was stripped of his title, and for the first time in decades, the people of Liberty County walked with their heads held high. Martha stood on the courthouse steps, holding Lena's hand. Reporters swarmed. Cameras clicked, but she wasn't interested in fame, just peace. General Monroe approached and offered her a nod. "You did what no one else had the courage to," he said. "You stood up." Martha looked at Lena, then back at him. "No," she said. "We stood up." Part 16. The empty chair at the kitchen table. They returned home quietly. Not to the town that had broken them, but to the small upstairs room over the hardware store, where Lena had once cried herself to sleep, and Martha had once prayed quietly into her pillow for answers. The nightmare was over. Harlan was gone. The badge that had once carried so much unchecked power was now just a piece of scrap metal in a sealed evidence locker. But something still lingered. At breakfast, the kitchen table had 3 chairs. Derek sat in one, Martha in another, but Lena avoided the third. It was as if the ghost of the girl she used to be still haunted that space, the version of herself. Before everything changed, Martha noticed. She didn't force her. Healing, she knew, was never loud. It crept in softly, like spring after a bitter winter. Part 17. The woman in the mirror. Weeks passed. Martha began working part-time at a local shelter for abused women. She didn't talk about what happened. She didn't need to. The lines on her face spoke louder than words. She became a quiet legend there, the woman who had fought the system, the mother who wouldn't give up. Sometimes she'd pass a mirror and barely recognize herself, not because of her age or her worn eyes, but because she finally saw something she hadn't in years: peace. Lena, meanwhile, took up photography. It began with borrowed cameras, then with black and white portraits of people who had lived through something: homeless veterans, single mothers, silent survivors. She didn't pose them, just captured their truths. One day, she showed Martha a photo. It was of herself, staring back with strong eyes, chin raised slightly. For the first time, the woman in the frame looked like she belonged in her own life. "I think I want to show this in a gallery," Lena said. Martha reached over and touched her hand. "You should." Part 18. Derek's promise. Derek had returned to his father's world, but not as the boy who once flipped pizzas behind a counter. He started a foundation, Second Witness, an organization devoted to protecting victims of abuse and giving voice to the silenced in corrupt systems. Backed by his father's resources, but fueled by his own fire, he never stopped loving Lena. They didn't rush, didn't talk about rings or wedding dates. Some wounds take time. But every Friday, he brought her sunflowers and left them on her windowsill. No note, no pressure, just a gesture, a promise that he'd still be there. One afternoon, she finally met him at the door, sunflower in hand. "I'm not ready for everything," she said, "but I'm ready to stop hiding." Derek smiled. "That's more than enough." Part 19. Full circle at Main Street. Months later, the new mayor of Liberty County invited Martha and Lena to return. Not for pity, not for ceremony, but to rename the very street where the nightmare began. Main Street, where once Martha had shouted into the face of injustice, was now being rededicated as Greenway, in honor of every voice that refused to stay silent. The event was small, but packed. Dozens of townspeople, mothers who had never spoken, daughters who now walked unafraid. Some brought flowers, others brought hugs. And when Martha stepped up to speak, she held no paper, just Lena's hand. "All I did," she said softly, "was refuse to believe that silence was the only option. We were poor, we were tired, but we were not powerless." Tears rolled down cheeks, and for the first time in a long time, everyone felt something that had been missing for years: hope. Part 20. When the letters arrived, they didn't expect it. But it started with one letter, then 2, then a stack from all over the country: women, men, grandparents, even former officers who had been pushed out for speaking up. "Your story gave me the strength to file a report. I thought I was crazy until I heard what happened to your daughter. I want to help your foundation." Martha read every one, Sometimes she and Lena would stay up until midnight, reading them aloud, laughing, crying, remembering that their pain wasn't wasted, that it had become a torch for someone else, and though they never asked for it, they became heroes. Not the kind in capes or medals, the kind in bruises and healing hearts. Part 21. The final morning years passed. Martha walked slower now. Her hands ached in the cold, but her eyes, those stubborn, fire-fed eyes, never dimmed. On her porch, a small brass plaque read, "In this house lives a woman who once stood up alone and made the world listen." One morning, Lena came out with 2 cups of coffee. She had a gold band on her left hand now. Derek was still fighting the good fight now as a father, husband, and a quiet warrior for justice. They sat together on the steps, the sun climbing the edge of the town. "You ever regret it?" Lena asked quietly, going back, speaking out. Martha looked out across the street where kids were walking to school, where patrol cars now had accountability, where justice finally meant something. "Not for one second," she said. Lena rested her head on her mother's shoulder, and for a long while, they just watched the world, their world, move gently on a healed. In a town where silence was survival, one mother's voice cracked the walls of corruption, not with money, not with power, but with truth. And sometimes truth is louder than any badge.